Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I'm your host, John Strazisich. Okay, then coming here to this slide, once again, we'll look to the Aleppo Codex, and we're looking here at the bottom of the colophon here, so we can only, get verse 7 here, and it says, "Ko hirani v'hine Adonai nitzav al chomat anak uviyado anak." And so this just simply says, "Thus he caused me to see, and behold, the Lord was standing upon a wall of Anak, or a plumbed wall, and in his hand was Anak, or we'll just say a plumb line." That would be the easiest. But note here that Anak is repeated twice. He's standing on a wall of Anak, and in his hand is Anak. So the way we understand this is that this Anak here means tin in its lexical form. It is a loan word, I believe, Akkadian, and it only occurs here, in the biblical text. I believe Anak is only here in Amos, and but it does. There's a Hebrew word that means tin, which is bedil. And so they just, it's just two words referring to the same metal, and so the best translation that we can come to is, "Thus he caused me to see, and behold, the Lord was standing upon a plumbed wall, and in his hand was a plumb line." Okay, then we'll continue on here at the top of the next colophon here, and we are looking here at verses 8 and 9 of chapter 7. "Vayomer Adonai Eli ma'ata ro'eh Amos va'omar Anak Vayomer Adonai hine sam Anak B'kerev Ami Yisrael lo osif od avor lo v'nashamu bamot Yishak u'mikdeshe Yisrael yeheravu v'kamti al beit Yarovam b'cherev." So what we've got here in this particular in these verses here is Yahweh is going to then question Amos about what he sees, and then he's going to give his response, and then Yahweh is going to then interpret it. Okay, then moving along with our translation. "And Yahweh said to me, 'What do you see, Amos?' And I said, 'Anak, a plumb line.' And the Lord said, 'Behold, I am putting a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel, and I shall no longer pass by him. And the high places of Isaac shall be desolate, and the sanctuaries of Israel shall be in ruins. And I will raise up against the house of Jeroboam a sword." Okay, so that's our translation here, and we'll continue on. Okay, then coming to this slide, we're looking here at the basic structure of this particular chapter. And last time we focused here on the first two visions, Amos's autobiographical, contested visionary accounts in verses 1 to 6, and that we looked at that, the locust plague, and then the trial by fire. Today we're focusing here on on point 2 here, and we're just going to look at A and B here. The third vision, the plumb line in the hand of Yahweh, and then the biographical account of Amaziah's confrontation with Amos at Bethel in verses 10 to 17. And so we're just going to be focusing here on finishing up chapter 7. But this is some of the, just the basic structure of this particular passage. So we'll move on. Okay, then coming then to this particular slide, we'll look specifically at the text and comment on it. Thus he caused me to see, and behold, the Lord was standing upon a plumbed wall, and in his hand was a plumb line. And Yahweh said to me, Ma'ata ro'eh Amos, what do you see, Amos? And I said, Anak, I see a plumb line. And the Lord said, okay, so after Vayomer Adonai, then the rest of verse 8 and 9 then is all going to be a poetic response. And it comes with a distick and then a tristick here in verse 9. And what I did here was I wanted to arrange the tristick, both here horizontally here, but I wanted to do it vertically here to show you that Nashamu is chiastically constructed against Yeharavu, and then likewise the object of the verb here, Bamot Yishak with Mikdashe Yisrael here, and then again we have Yeharavu is then chiastically constructed here against Vikamti, and then the object of the verb here is going to be in it with, and I'll raise up against the house of Jeroboam with the sword. And so this is all just chiastically constructed here, and that's important to see that poetically, and that this was when Yahweh speaks, it's very, very artistically presented, and remember, this is a whole visionary account, and so this here is just beautiful the way it all plays out. But the interpretive word here, anak, here is in the modern recent commentaries, people just translate it as 10. And what does this mean? They just raise up their hands and they say, we don't know. But no, our translations of plumb line are very well founded, because anak does mean 10, and if you look in the lexicons and dictionaries, you'll see that it's also listed as lead. Okay, and lead is well known as a source for a plumb line, but 10 is also, and I wanted to put down here Zechariah 4:8 here. It says Vayehi devar Adonai Elile Mor. Okay, the hands of Zerubbabel founded this house, and his hands shall finish it, and you shall know that Yahweh of hosts has sent me to you. For who has despised the day of small things, and they shall be glad and see what? The ha'even habedil beyad Zerubbabel, and they will see the stone of 10 in the hand of Zerubbabel. So this is all translated, the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. And what is it? It's a plumb line, and it's a stone of 10. And so if we have Anak here, Yahweh's standing upon a wall of Anak. He's standing upon a plumbed wall, and in his hand is a plumb line. Okay, and you can get this from Zechariah chapter 4, verses 8, 9, and 10 here, and it makes perfect sense. and there's no need for a bunch of just ignorance, pleading ignorance. We don't know what this means. Of course we do, and that's why the translations, most of them have just put down here a plumb line. So now that we have that set, looking here, at this particular passage, he's putting, a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. So, this means that the people are out of plumb, okay, and that since they're out of plumb, then the metaphorical wall of Israel has to fall and come down. They are bulging, and they are about to stumble and collapse, and that's exactly what the plumb line metaphor of the plumb line, represents. It means that that Israel is out of plumb, and then it says, "And I shall no longer, pass over him." This avor lo here, to pass over him. This just means that he's no longer going to overlook Israel's and will put sin. He's not going to overlook them anymore. So he's not going to then just pass by them and not worry about it. He is going to literally, just like a wall has to be torn down, Israel is going to have to be dismantled. And so we'll see what that looks like in verse 9. So it tells us basically, in verse 8 with the dye-stick, what needs to happen, and then what does it look like? Well, we'll come here at verse 9, and the high places of Isaac shall be desolate, and the sanctuaries of Israel shall be, ruined. Okay, so that just means then that these national sanctuaries that Israel set up underneath Jeroboam the son of Nebat the first, and it's been held, all the way down here to Jeroboam the second. Well, these false worship centers at Dan Bethel have to be removed. And then note here he puts in the high places of Isaac, and that's going to be proleptic here for what's coming, and we'll get into that. He mentions Isaac because Isaac, he mainly dwelt in Beersheba, and we'll get to that when we cross that path. So then he first mentions the destruction here of the sanctuaries of Israel, and then lastly, then he's going to raise up against the house of Jeroboam. Now, this is the first mention of Jeroboam in the book. And Yahweh is going to raise up against his house with the sword. So that means he's going to then, begin the elimination of the house of Jeroboam. And we know that the prophecy to the prophetic word given to Jehu. This is the house of Jehu. And Jeroboam is the third. It says that your house will last to the fourth generation. Well, Jeroboam is the third member of this lineage, of this dynasty of Jehu, and his son Zechariah only lasts 6 months. Okay, so after Jeroboam passes away and dies, well, then 6 months later, his son only reigns for 6 months, and so the sword has definitely removed the house of Jehu, and it's no longer, living. So that is, that's important here to see. And so that we have the destruction of the monarchy, and we have the destruction of the religious center here, specifically, of Bethel. Okay, then coming here then to this particular slide, one of our, I believe this is Dwayne Garrett, in interpreting the Anak here. He says Amos's answer is short and to the point. Anak was obviously something that Amos could easily recognize. It also is noteworthy that he does not speak of the Chomat Anak, but simply the Anak itself. It is the Anak in Yahweh's hand, not the wall, that is the focus. The other cue about Anak is that in 7:8, God places Anak in the midst of Israel as a judgment. Thus, there is a wall of Anak, but Anak could be held in the hand, at least in God's hand. And Amos knew Anak when he saw it, and it could be set in Israel as a mark of judgment. But what is Anak? Options include: 1, Anak is a plumbline. This is a medieval view and is based on the idea that Anak is literally the metal lead, but that by metonymy it is a plumbline. And this view, until recently, was widely followed. And so he's going to go on to suggest all these other different meanings, and then at the very bottom he says this: in short, the meaning of Anak is lost. Okay, so if you think that you want to, this is just a rabbit hole to go down, but I'm just letting you know that you can go down the whole rabbit hole here. I put it all here. It's all fine. And there's reasons for it, but like I said, just going to Zechariah chapter 4, it shows you what that there was a stone of tin in the hand of Zerubbabel, and that he was there to, his hand shall founded that this house, and it's going to finish it. So it's just simple. We know what tin is. It's either tin or lead, and that a stone of tin in the book of Zechariah is always translated as a plumb line. So don't be in the depths of despair here with Dwayne Garrett. In short, the meaning of Anak is lost. What? How stupid. Okay, so what I wanted to do here in this slide, in these two verses here, firstly, in 2 Kings 21:13, we also have the use of stretching out a line, and the use of a plumb line, used metaphorically. And Yahweh says the following: and I will stretch out over Jerusalem the line of Samaria and the plumb line of the house of Ahab, and I shall blot out Jerusalem just as one wipes a dish by wiping and turning it over. Okay, so in this particular verse here in 2 Kings, we have the stretching out a line. Okay, so that's just to make sure that we've got horizontally we have straight lines. Okay, and then the plumb line is used vertically. Okay, to make sure that the wall doesn't bulge. So stretching out the line is these are what the carpenter uses, whether it be building a house or whether it be building the temple, and then it's used metaphorically to talk about that God is going to destroy Jerusalem here, and he's going to determine that by seeing if the Jerusalem itself is if its wall is bulging or its walls are no longer straight, and so that's what's going on here. And then to further depict that, And notice here, this comes with a die stick, and it's finished with the tri-stick, just like in our passage. And so this metaphor, here of stretching out the line and using the plumb bob, and notice here the line of Samaria. So it's already, Amos was prophesying that this is what Yahweh was going to do, and in 2 Kings now this is going to be applied. What Yahweh did by the plumb line is now applied to Jerusalem itself. More than 100 years later, that this is referring to 586. And Amos was referring to events. At least the plumb line, was for the house of Jeroboam. Eventually it was all 722. With the complete removal, of the people into exile. But Yahweh started he brought the sword against the house of Jeroboam, within 6 months after the death of Jeroboam II, Zechariah died, and so the lineage there started by Jehu lasted to the 4th generation after him, and it came to an end. So now that this metaphor is applied to Jerusalem, that the line's going to be stretched out. It's the line of Samaria, and the house of Ahab, is going to be the plumb line, and that the house of Ahab is mentioned because that was the house that Jehu destroyed, because the house of Ahab had brought in Baal worship, and Jehu was brought in to eliminate Baal worship, and it was just replaced with another false Yahweh worship underneath underneath Jehu, and because they were supposed to worship in Jerusalem. They were never supposed to maintain those sanctuaries of Dan and Bethel, where Jeroboam I set up the golden calves, and said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." So those were false worship sites. But I just wanted you to be aware of this particular passage here, and it does have significance for that it's applying Amos's destructive use of the plumb line against Jerusalem here, in one sense. And then the Micah passage just has, who is a God like you, forgiving iniquity, passing over transgression, for the remnant of his inheritance here. So, to pass over here, that means to overlook transgression here, to forgive transgression. And so that is how it was. Yahweh was no longer going to pass over, Israel, no longer. And so that idiom, could be viewed from Micah here. So that would be a good passage to look at the verb here in the participial form, over. Okay, I'm just including this particular slide so you can see the dynasty of Jehu, and that that he was promised that his dynasty would go to the 4th generation. So we have Jehoahaz here, Jehoash, Jeroboam II, and finally Zechariah, the 4th, to the 4th generation. That is after Jehu himself, and that all was all done here right after as soon as Jeroboam died. Zechariah only lasted 6 months, and then he was he was killed by, I believe, Shallum, and then there is just one assassination after the next: Menachem, Pekahiah, Pekah, and then Hoshea here. So it was just a bloodshed after that until 722, when the whole thing was flushed down the toilet. Okay, now we have the confrontation of Amaziah against Amos, and this is definitely a biographical account that is inserted here, but it was done very artistically, I should say, and as far as the historical record of how this became a part here of the book of Amos. We're in chapters 7 and 8 here. It's an autobiographical account, and it says, "Behold, Yahweh caused me to see, and I saw." So he's talking in the first person. When we come here to verse 10, then everything changes, and so scholars have wondered, what is the provenance of this, and so if it didn't come from, it doesn't seem that it would come from Amos himself. It was probably his own disciples here that I would say, because whatever this material has here in verses 10 to 17 is inspired by God. We're not questioning that. We're just entertaining the idea of how this all came to be. And since we're in the middle of an autobiographical account, then how does this biographical third-person perspective enter in right into the middle of all this? And so that's all that we're entertaining here. And I would just say it was, at the least you could say it was the disciples of Amos inserted this here. But you need to look at the insertion, because Jeroboam is mentioned, is only mentioned right here in chapter 7. In Amos's own vision, that it's said that Vicomti, I'm going to raise up against the house of Jeroboam Becherev, with a sword, right? And then this insertion is, and Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sent to Jeroboam, the king of Israel. So, you just had Jeroboam mentioned in verse 9 by the prophecy of Yahweh's own interpretation, of what the plumbline meant, right? And that the high places of Isaac, were going to be, destroyed, and then the sanctuaries of Israel were going to be ruined, and then he would lastly raise up against the house of Jeroboam with the sword. So we have Jeroboam mentioned here, and we also have the sword mentioned here as well in this passage. If you come down here to verse 17, therefore thus says the Lord, your wife shall play the whore in the city, your sons and your daughters shall fall by the sword here. And so the sword and Jeroboam are all mentioned here. So this passage was very artistically well placed right here where it's at. And that should give you, that this wasn't just happen chance. It was very well thought out, and this is what God wanted to have inserted here. And that's how I would understand this. But notice here that, so we do have this, it's kind of like a parentheses. It kind of shows you on a side show here, of what's going on. So it says that Amaziah, the priest of Bethel. So this gives us, some background material to what's going on. We have Amos's preaching, but, we don't really have a whole lot of response. Well, this particular passage opens up that whole vista, and you can see what's going on. Well, as a result of Amos's, prophetic activity, Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sends. So he sent some messengers to Jeroboam the king, and saying the following: Amos has conspired against you in the midst of the house of Israel. The land is not able to sustain all his words. For thus says Amos, by a sword Jeroboam shall die. Israel shall certainly go into captivity from his land. And so we can see here that he's quoting here a paraphrase of what Amos just got done saying. But here he says Jeroboam shall die by the sword, which didn't happen. God just said that he was going to raise up against Jeroboam, the house of Jeroboam, a sword. And then when you're trying to accuse somebody, you're going to, when you take it to the person that that has significance, that is the king himself, you're going to slightly bend the words so that your side looks very, like the king is going to take action very quick. And so that's what he does here. So Jeroboam never died by the sword. But Amaziah wants, King Jeroboam to think that is what Amos had certainly prophesied. It was similar. Remember, it just said that I will raise up against the house of Jeroboam with the sword. So, and that, in fact, that's what I showed you. That the house of Jehu, of whom Jeroboam was the third generation. And it was only going to last to the fourth generation, and that fourth generation, as I said before, only lasted for 6 months with his son Zechariah. So he says this to the king, and then that Jeroboam, you're going to die by the sword, king, and that Israel will certainly go into captivity from his land. Okay, and the last part here is good. This part here is just trying to get the king to respond immediately to get Amos out of town. And notice here in verse 12, we never hear any response from Jeroboam. Well, the text doesn't say that. So I would say that there's a whole lot more to this little unit here of 10 to 17 that only portions of this was given to us here, and this was all that was really pertinent, that was needed for some background material here to fill in here, to give us a little better understanding of what's going on in the book of Amos. But this may have been a condensed version of something else. But we don't have any other record other than just this text itself. But we'll look here in verse 12. And Amaziah said to Amos, the seer. So we just have Amaziah sending, first of all, and he's called the priest of Bethel, and he sends this, messenger and letter to Jeroboam, and he's stating that thus says, Amos, that, Jeroboam's going to die by the sword and Israel's going to go in captivity from the land. Now it switches that now he just Amaziah addresses Amos personally. So we don't know, like I was saying, we don't know the outcome of what Jeroboam said. But Amaziah says, go, flee you to the land of Judah and eat bread there, and there prophesy. But in Bethel you shall no longer prophesy, for it is the sanctuary of the king, and it is, we'll just say, the royal temple. It literally uvet mamlacha, the royal house, but in a distic with mikdash, beit here means temple, and that's what most scholars are going to say. So he said, no longer prophesy here. Go to Judea, there eat bread, and then the basis is for this because Bethel here, it is the sanctuary of the king, and it is the royal temple. Now we have in verse 14, we have Amos's response, specifically here to verses 12 and 13. So Amos answered and said to Amaziah, I am not a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I am a herdsman and a, boles here means like a picker or a dresser of shikmim. So this is sycamores. This is the Ficus sycamora tree here of Palestine that grows in the Shephelah, and it's a very prolific fig tree. And boles here just refers to, even the Septuagint has, you have to scratch or scar the fig so that it ripens here. So this is, so he calls himself a herdsman, and one who dresses, or attends to a sycamore tree, or in meaning the figs, and that in this particular species of figs, if you scratch it, it ripens, within like 5 days or something like that. So it was an important process of this type of agriculture. And then it says in verse 15, Amos says, Yahweh took me from behind the sheep. And Yahweh said to me, go prophesy to my people Israel. And now hear the word of the Lord. And so then now, Amos is about to then go into here, his response specifically to Amaziah here, and this is pretty devastating. So Amos here, this response here where he says that Yahweh took me from behind the sheep. This is almost identical. That Yahweh took David, also from behind the sheep, right? To be a leader over, his people Israel. And so this is some similar language here that I think you can find in the books of Samuel, probably 2 Samuel, and also I think Psalm 78 has some of the same language here. So that would be an important thing for you to research yourself. But it says that Yahweh said to me, "Go prophesy to my people Israel." And so this is this whole confrontation here with Amaziah and Amos. And you can see here that, and Amos answered and said. So this is being written in the third person. So I just want you to understand that this whole unit here from 10 to 17 is a biographical account inserted into the midst of an autobiographical account. Okay, now we come down here to this place where I have stated that Amos is dripping on 240 megahertz here. You may have wondered what that was all about. So in verse 16, Ve'ata Shema Devar Adonai. And now hear the word of the Lord. So this is now Amos is replying specifically to Amaziah. You say, you shall not prophesy against Israel, and you shall not drip against the house of Isaac. So here we have the word drip. So he's dripping on 240 megahertz. So if you have the ruach, if you put on here ruach, and the divine name here, this adds up to 240. So Amos is dripping on 240 megahertz, which is prophesying by the Holy Spirit. And what does he say? You say, you shall not prophesy against Israel, nor drip against the house of Isaac. Therefore, thus says the Lord, your wife shall play the whore in the city, your sons and daughters shall fall by the sword, and your land shall be divided by a cord, a line, and you shall die in an unclean land, and Israel shall certainly go into captivity from his land. So nataf here, dripping. So this is just another word here that parallels, the verb here for navah here, to prophesy, and nataf here means just literally to drip. And it says it again at the end of the book that the mountains will drip with sweet wine. It's the same verb here, natah. It's used in the book of Micah. It's used in several different contexts here for prophesying, and but it means to drip. And you'll see this in the second chapter of Micah. It's repeated there like four times or something like that. But some translations will say preach, prophesy, preach or prophesy. That's how they're going to interpret drip here. But I just leave it. It's literal meaning here, and it's used by Isaiah. It's used in quite a few passages. But you may have not known what that is. But so what does the Ruach Adonai inspire Amos to say? Well, some pretty heavy-duty words. The death of his sons and daughters by the sword, his own death in an unclean land, and that Israel's certainly going to go into captivity, and his wife's going to play a whore in the city. So, I mean, when you think that prophets can only say good words, obviously Amos didn't get that memo, okay? And in this memo, Yahweh specifically said, "Hear the word of the Lord." So, just for your own knowledge, do not limit what Yahweh can say and cannot say. You do not control Yahweh, okay? You would be doing a great disservice if you would say anything otherwise. He's inspired by Yahweh to speak death to his family. Okay, this has been another session of biblical theology, exegesis, and hermeneutics, where meaning's always context-driven. Please like, share, and subscribe. And thank you for all the new, subscribers that have come on recently. And it is nice to know that you're listening. God bless you.